It never happens at a good time. The pipe bursts at midnight. The heater quits on the coldest night. Suddenly, you're overwhelmed. That's when HomeServe is here. For $4.99 a month, you're never alone. Just call their 24/7 hotline and a local pro is on the way. Trusted by millions, HomeServe delivers peace of mind when you need it most. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to HomeServe.com. That's HomeServe.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Hey everybody, this is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and we've made it to episode 420, which means it's time for another Brü A. Joining me to answer a bunch of listener-submitted questions is contributor Jordan Folks.
Thanks for having me back, Marshall. It's always fun to get to talk about beer.
These Brü A episodes are always a lot of fun. Just a quick reminder that one of the many benefits of being a patron of Brülosophy is that we prioritize their questions for these Brü A episodes. So if there's something you've wanted to know, or perhaps you've emailed a question that we haven't responded to, your best bet for getting it answered is to become a patron of Brülosophy. These episodes, again, are always a blast. I'm looking forward to getting into some of these questions with you today, Jordan. And if you happen to be wondering what a patron is, we're going to let you know. They're the amazing people who support us over here at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where by making a small monthly pledge, you receive anywhere rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique benefits at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live brew day with a contributor of Brülosophy, among other things like also having their, questions prioritized for episodes like this. Massive thanks to all of our current patrons. They're the reason you all get to listen to us for free, and we love them for it. If you're interested in learning more about the rewards you can get for supporting us in this way, head over to patreon.com/Brülosophy to check it out. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience won't change at all, and we get a little kickback for that referral. Finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else it is that you listen to these podcasts, as it helps those who may not be familiar with us yet to more easily find the show. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their awesome all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240-volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are awesome. Efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You will not be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an awesome YouTube channel as well, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Stefan Sia, I believe is how you say that, wrote in with some feedback after hearing us talk about decoctions. I thought this was a good one for you, Jordan, because I believe you're the only one who on Brülosophy who still does decoctions. Stefan says, I've done my fair share of decoction mashing, and overall I agree that it's quite time-consuming and could possibly be replaced by adding some specialty malts to the grain bill, or even just replacing some Pilsner malt with Munich malt. But Marshall doubts it has any impact on flavor because the liquid keeps those Maillard reactions at bay, which I disagree with. Sure, when there's a lot of liquid involved, that sounds correct, yet if you pull a third to half of thick mash, it consists of mainly grain with less liquid, and that stuff scorches just as fast as a chili, the food chili. If you don't stir properly, there are your Maillard reactions, he says. The grain sinks to the bottom of your kettle right where the highest heat hits it, especially in the beginning when the starches haven't converted to sugars dissolving into the liquid. You have to stir quite a bit. I still do an abbreviated decoction every now and then by starting the mash with a water to grain ratio of 3:1 at 35C or 95F, letting it rest for 10 minutes so the enzymes get into the liquid, taking about half of the total mash volume out of the kettle and putting it in another vessel that'll keep it warm. I then bring the rest of the mash up to 72C or 162F for saccharification for 10 to 20 minutes, then boil it for 10 minutes before adding it back to the rest of the mash. God, this sounds convoluted. Where the beta amylase is waiting to do its job. This way I hit my target temperature of about 66C or 151F, where I let it rest for half an hour, and then I proceed from there. Doing this, I boil off way less liquid since the enzymes wait in the liquid. They don't get denatured in the decoction process. As far as I know, the later decoction processes are only a means of hitting the right mash temperatures in days when neither clocks nor thermometers had been invented yet, and kettles/pans were heated by a roaring fire. Boiling water always has the same temperature. That way, it's only a matter of mixing the right volumes. Plus, a fire-resistant pan to boil liquid was more expensive than a huge wooden barrel to mix the liquids in. Yay! More beer. Full disclosure, I've never done a side-by-side experiment, Stefan says, but I'm convinced I should. Plus, I do agree, as a Bavarian, some bias may be involved. Still, the chili comparison, he says. What say you, Jordan, about this, decoction and chili analogy?
I hadn't heard that before. Yeah, I think that you get a lot of depth of flavor this way, and in my opinion, it is worth the effort. The last couple of decoction experiments that I ran did come back significant. Tasters could tell the difference. One thing we do see is an observable difference is it does increase the OG and reduces the volume due to some of the extra boil off associated with the decoction. But based on some back of the envelope math, it does seem that the decoction is giving us extra gravity points that are above and beyond the evaporation associated with the decoction, and it seems to give you a deeper flavor. And I think that in my opinion, a step mash can give you a deeper flavor as well. A single infusion can just be a little thinner. Not that makes a bad beer. It's just for some of these Czech and Bavarian lagers, I like that deep malt character. But what, Marshall, I don't know that we've done is ever tested a specialty malt compared to a decoction to see if that's able to achieve what we would, in theory, want is a non-significant difference, suggesting that the specialty malts could, in fact, replicate a decoction. Have you ever tested that?
No, you're talking like melanoidin or aromatic or something. Yeah, no, we haven't tested it yet. And a big part of the reason for that is because up until the decoction experiment that you're referring to that you performed, our decoction experiments return non-significant results. So I just want to clarify. I've never said, I never intended to say with any authority whatsoever that, decoctions have no impact on flavor at all. Rather, I've always just cited past experiment results where tasters could not reliably tell apart decocted beers from non-decocted beers, as well as my own anecdotal experience being unable to taste any impact of a decoction on beers that I knew were made using that method. So, when not a bone to pick with you, Jordan. You describe the flavor as deeper. That's a subjective, adjective that you're using. What I would say, from trying to be a little bit more objective, is that, but based on the data, there was a difference in flavor. Now that might be subjectively perceived as deeper, more malty, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's awesome. That's only point I want to make on what you said. When I combine all of the stuff that I just talked about, though, the fact that we've got this data, what we know about the history of decoction and why it was originally used, as well as my own personal, perception, I don't see it as being something that I need to do to improve my beer necessarily. It may have a flavor impact, and I want to be able to test that out and show it over and over and over again. It may only have a flavor impact in certain styles. Who knows? But it's not. Again, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying decoctions don't do anything. I just cite data because I'm that kind of a nerd. Anyways, when chili, I do want to point this out though. When chili does that thing that you're referring to, Stefan, and it kind of burns to the bottom of the cooking vessel, that's not a Maillard reaction. That is actually referred to as scorching, which occurs at temperatures of around 180 C or 355 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. It doesn't happen under that. That can actually contribute bitter or like burnt, acrid flavors to beer. The Maillard reaction, on the other hand, involves amino acids and sugars reacting in such a way to create what they call browning. Can Maillard reactions occur in a 10-minute decoction? Maybe, but not a lot. And that's scientific. It's not going to happen very readily. In fact, most evidence points to it as having an imperceptible impact on flavor. Decoctions in general, that is like hard science evidence, not just Brülosophy bullshit, So all of that to say, if you like performing decoctions and you're able to show, whether it's your own personal anecdote or even through experimental processes that it is having an impact, I think that's rad. And, if it doesn't bother you to do it, I would keep doing it as well. I just don't have the time or the interest, I guess. But I'm not judging people who do. I just like to look at things from a very clinical, objective perspective without judgment. And I think a lot of people take it as me crapping on something just because I'm talking about data. That is not my point at all. So if it came across that way, that is my bad. Did you have any final words on decoction before we move on?
I think for those that are willing to spend the extra time, it's really fun and can make a really great beer. But, if making the absolute fastest beer as possible is your MO, maybe decoction is not the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and I agree with you that if you find that fun, if there are people out there who still brew on a 3-tier fly sparge system because it's fun for them. We've shown over and over. I mean, we've got so many different, quicker, I guess, more efficient methods. But they like doing it that way, and no one's dissing them. So you do you. I agree with you that if it's fun, keep doing it. All right, if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Don't forget to snag yourself some badass Brülosophy merch, which you can find at brülosophy.com/shop. We are offering more options than we ever have before, from t-shirts, hoodies, and hats to fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, tank tops, mobile phone cases, stickers, and so much more. We've done our best to keep prices reasonable, and international shipping is now available. Again, you can head to brülosophy.com/shop and click one of the product images on that page, which will redirect you to our Dashery store, or you can go there directly, brülosophy.dashery.com. There's also a link in the description of this episode. This is yet another way you can help us out while getting something cool in return.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Huge thanks to our patrons who not only fund what it is that we do here at Brülosophy, but submitted their Brü A questions for this episode. The first one comes from patron Joey Steckler, who says, I've been brewing for about a year, mostly extract batches. My first hazy IPA and first time kegging turned into a nightmare because so much hop sludge made it into the keg that I could not pour it until I switched to a floating dip tube. What do you recommend for reducing hop matter in heavily hopped beers? Muslin bags, cold crashing, transfer technique, or something else?
Yeah, this is a classic problem, and it probably is pretty fermenter or dry hop vessel dependent.
Yeah.
I do everything in kegs, and I have a few kegs that just have a cut dip tube, but still like the standard stainless dip tube, and I'll ferment like lagers in those occasionally. But for something I'm dry hopping, I always use a floating dip tube. So if that is in your arsenal of possibilities, definitely my recommendation. I will also cold crash, so I'll dry hop in a keg with a floating dip tube for like 24 hours, and then cold crash that down to like 31F or around 0C, and then transfer. Maybe that helps. But if this is really a concern and you don't have a lot of technological tools at your disposal, a bag is a really easy way to do it. Just make sure that that bag isn't going to block the port that the liquid comes out of. I think that our experiments even demonstrated that bagging your dry hops does reduce the effectiveness of it, and you'll witness that. You'll see a bag that's if the bag isn't big enough, they'll just or the stainless steel tube will just be totally packed out, and you're not getting the same level of liquid exposure. But it certainly can prevent clogs. So if you can figure out a way to dry hop loose, I do think that it has a more impactful effect. But a bag is a good backup.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I'm gonna also like tap back into the before I had the gear that I have today, because it sounds like Joey, being a newer brewer, is probably, I'm assuming, using either buckets or carboys with maybe like an auto siphon or something like that. And a little trick that I would do,
they said a floating dip tube, Marshall.
Yeah. I know, I saw that as well. So maybe it's in a keg, but it sounds to me like maybe it was his first time kegging and he used the floating dip tube for serving, not for. I don't know. I'm a little confused on that, but
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So for Joey, if it's in the fermenter, a little trick that is very, very rudimentary and it works really well. Yes, first off, if you cold crash, that cold is going to drop a lot of that particulate out of solution, which just makes it easier to put your siphon in the middle of the volume of beer. You don't want to oxidize it, of course. If you're doing this, you run the risk of oxidation. I would recommend, it's very cheap, getting some potassium or sodium sodium metabisulfite and putting that just a little sprinkle in the bottom of your keg to try to scrub as much oxygen, that it was exposed to that beer as possible. But in the racking process, that transfer process, if you just start the siphon in the middle of that volume of beer, so just drop it down about halfway in, and then get it going, and then you can very gently lower it so it doesn't stir up the trube at the bottom of your fermentation vessel, you'll be able to get most of that beer out, or a little trick that I would do to try to maximize the volume of beer that I was transferring is I would just take a towel and roll it up and put it at the back end of my fermentation vessel, and then let that sit for about 15 minutes so it settles out. Anything that got stirred up settles out, and then do the same trick. And then you can kind of put the tip of your your racking cane down in the corner where there's the most beer, and you're going to get more out of it. But the bag works. Again, I'm a free dry hopper as well. I feel like you get more dry hop character out of that. We've had some experiments that seem to support that notion. But cold crash, I don't know. You cold crash all your hoppy beers, right?
I do, and I think that it might help drop some of that stuff down to the bottom. But you make a good point. If you're using a racking cane versus a floating dip tube, it's a bit of a different mechanics.
Yeah.
And so it kind of depends on what you're working with. But yeah, gosh, you're right. He says he can't pour it from the keg. And so that's a big thing is with these heavily dry hop beers, a floating dip tube or a cut dip tube can really help for serving.
Yes.
But it's really important to minimize getting any in the first place. Let's try to avoid getting any in the keg in the first place, and then, it's less of an issue.
Well, and my final point was going to be basically what you just said. There are people out there. In fact, I believe Jake Houlihan, who was with Brülosophy a few years ago, I believe he liked, or at least for certain styles, would dry hop in the keg. That's a thing. If you're doing that, I would highly suggest doing that. There's a method where you put it in a bag and then you suspend it from the bottom of your keg lid. And yeah, you might, have to use some, I believe people were using like sanitized fishing line or even just dental floss, not minty dental floss, but and you make it just long enough to where it doesn't really touch the bottom of the keg. And even when it's wet, it won't get sucked up into your liquid out tube. If you're doing that, fine. But I'm with you, Jordan. That was my final point. Just don't dry hop in the keg if you don't have to. I know that was a real popular thing in the beginning of the whole hazy IPA thing. I get it. If you're going to do that, definitely use something to contain those hops because it's going to create a nightmare, like you said, Joey. So.
All right. So now Charles Myers asks, given how much emphasis modern homebrewers place on oxygen-free transfers, have you measured actual dissolved oxygen differences between typical homebrew closed transfers and careful open transfers? I sometimes wonder if many home setups are giving brewers a false sense of security.
That is such a good point. I mean, I imagine you would agree that homebrewers sometimes engage in things just because it makes them feel like they're not messing anything up. But we have done one test, okay? We've done several cold side oxidation experiments, and this is one of those things that I did not believe was as bad. I mean, I'm kind of a skeptic anyways, right? I did not think cold side oxidation was as bad as it is. I am now I'm proud of the fact homebrewers are focusing on it. I think people are making better beer by trying to keep it from getting exposed to oxygen. I don't have a DO meter. These things are hella expensive. Most people aren't going to use them all the time, but we did do this one experiment. Unfortunately, it was not on a hazy IPA. It was on a cream ale that Malcolm Fraser made. And what he did is he took a kegged cream ale, bottled one, took bottles from that keg, right? Using a beer gun where he flushed the bottles with CO2 from that beer gun, filled them from the bottom up, did everything right the way you were supposed to. And then he took another set of bottles and just used a picnic tap, didn't flush the bottle. I mean, they're all sanitized, but didn't flush them with CO2. Basically slow poured the beer into the bottles, capped them off. And then he took them to a friend of his at a commercial brewery, and they had a DO meter. And so they measured the dissolved oxygen in each of those bottles. So the one that was bottled with the beer gun, I don't know if we've talked about this on the show yet. The one that was bottled with a beer gun had anywhere between 26.5 and 43 parts per billion of dissolved oxygen. That is insanely low. I believe Russian River, if I might be wrong on this, don't quote me, but I believe they just aim for under 80 ppb or something like that. So 26 and a half to 43 parts per billion is very good, especially for a homebrew, beer from a beer gun in a bottle. The picnic tap bottled beers ranged anywhere from 250 to 700 ppb. Still not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but orders of magnitude more than the one bottled properly with the beer gun. The weird thing is these beers did not return. They were not significantly different based on our triangle test data, but cream ale is also not a very hoppy style of beer. And what we've been able to show is that it really does seem to be the volume of hops that are used, the amount of hops that are used in beers that seem to be positively correlated with their sensitivity to dissolved oxygen in general, to cold side oxidation. So that is the data that we have. But Charles, I don't want you to think that I'm saying that this idea that some homebrewers, may have a false sense of security. I actually think a lot of them, we do a lot of things just to mitigate the potential risk, and I'm okay with that. I do it too. So.
Yeah, my friend has a DO meter, and I've wanted to kind of test these kind of things myself. But the problem is once it's in package, you really can't do it without a bottle piercing reading. So you have to go to a pro brewery. I'd love to do that someday, but I know that our experiments have consistently shown a difference, especially in hoppy beers, between closed and careful open transfers, and I really think that my beers have benefited from it. So I'm not so convinced it's a false sense of security. I think that if you do a closed transfer right, you are going to have a hell of a lot of oxygen than a careful open transfer.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to keep in mind when it comes to the cold side oxidation thing is that there are very easy methods for reducing exposure to oxygen. Even if you're making a cream ale, even if you're making a blonde ale, something that may not be risky, it is so easy to just get into your routine. Don't get me wrong. We all make mistakes. We all flub a little bit here and there. Just get into the routine, and that way when you make a hazy IPA, you're just more confident about it. I am fully convinced that those methods specifically related to cold side oxidation are having a very meaningful impact. And I, again, am very glad to hear that, more and more homebrewers are minding their oxygen exposure. So, all right. Adrian Boley has two questions. The first one, he says, I have a tincture of vodka and de arbol chili. What should I do when I use all the vodka? So it sounds like he's using the vodka maybe for cocktails or something. Can I just add more vodka, or should I make a new tincture with new peppers? This is not something I have any experience or even familiarity with, but maybe you do, Jordan?
I mess around with this stuff a little bit, but never chilies. And you could add this to a beer, maybe even imperial stout or something. So maybe that's the application here. I think you probably could get some more out of the chilies if you added more vodka, but in my opinion, probably good to just go ahead and start over, because inevitably you're going to have taken out some of the good stuff in the first round. And so it's kind of like, you can do a second fruiting for sour beers and it'll have like a lighter kind of fruit character, but there's still some good stuff in there. So if you're really a sustainable, use every last drop minded kind of person, certainly a possibility. But if you want the same level of potency, you should start over and use a new batch of chilies.
Yeah. So here's what I was going to suggest you do, Adrian, because this is just how I roll. De arbol chili is so cheap, at least where I live. Here in the Fresno area, we have a very strong Mexican culture, and you can go to any grocery store and pull like dried chilies off they're like $1.50. They're hella cheap. I'm assuming that you're using, maybe a 1 quart mason jar to make this tincture. Keep the one that is that you already did, fill that one back up with vodka, take some fresh chili, fill that one up, and then compare them. And then you could tell us. I'd be curious to know if you're getting more extraction from that already used chili versus a fresh one. I mean, that to me would be an interesting little experiment for you to do. So if you do it, please let us know. All right. His next question is something I can definitely answer. In fact, I've got a relevant experience from this morning. He says, do you have a favorite place to camp, or do you like to try different places? Jordan, you camp, right?
I do.
So do you have a favorite place, or where do you like to go?
Well, I live in Portland, Oregon, and so I would say broadly my favorite place to camp is the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington State. I don't really go to the same place every time, but yeah, it's just incredible. In the summer, the weather is mild. We don't really have mosquito problems typically up here. It does get cool at night, but it's not too hot during the day. Typically, I guess if you go to like a high desert, it's a little different. But yeah, so I really like the kind of like Mount Hood National Forest or the Olympics, those kind of like American rainforest regions.
Yeah, we've done some camping in Southern Oregon on the coast, and it's gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. That kind of Crescent City, California, up to I forget what the city's called.
Coos Bay.
Coos Bay, yeah, exactly. It's beautiful up there. It's not my favorite though. Where we live, it's a completely different climate than where you're at, Jordan. And so for us, we do most of our camping. As much as I might like the heat where I live, I mean, it'll get up into, the 110s easily every summer. A lot of people here do their camping to escape the heat, right? And so we call, say up the hill to an area called Huntington Lake. And that is my hands down favorite place to camp. It's an hour drive. We pull our trailer up there. And there's so many campsites. You've got federal land, you've got state land, and then you've got some private places. We just booked our favorite campsite this morning for Labor Day. It's a place called Lakeshore RV Resort. And they just redid this whole thing, and it's so cool. It's full hookups. We can clean everything out before we go home, and that way we just park our trailer and we're done. But yeah, we always camp with people, and that to me makes it really the experience that we're looking for is the people that we're with. It's not we've camped everywhere from Pismo Beach, further south areas further south from here. But my favorite place to go is up to Huntington Lake. I don't care what the campsite is. Lakeshore also has a bar attached to it, so that's pretty cool. And they're always throwing some sort of cool like weekend parties, and we just walk down from so it's not like deep into the woods, getting away from it all. It almost feels more like an 80s movie, that sort of like summer camp type of feel. And I love that. That's just my jam. And sitting around a campfire and drinking good beers with good friends and laughing is I love doing it. We do it several times every year. So that's what I would say is my favorite, though we do kind of bounce around. We tend to stick with, 200, 300 miles tops away from where we're at if we're going to go far for camping. But the vast majority of what we do is Shaver Lake / Huntington Lake, in those two areas. So.
All right. Next up is Tyson Sather, who has a couple questions. First one's on harvesting yeast and storage. He says, I like to do the double starter method and then put them in a mason jar sanitized in a dishwasher. And then I also fill with high proof spirits like Everclear. However, I still worry they are contaminated. How do I make myself feel more confident in my harvesting practices?
I don't know. I might be a therapist, but I'm not going to pull this out with your anxiety about contamination, Tyson. I think you just sound like a thoughtful homebrewer. I mean, that is a normal worry. Maybe this will help. I don't do much harvesting of yeast these days. I know that a lot of people started harvesting because of the article that I wrote on harvesting from starters and all of that. That's great. I have done hundreds of I know you still use slurry and stuff, Jordan, so you'll probably have more relevant comment on this. I have harvested hundreds of batches of yeast from starters, and I've never had one turn on me. And all I did every single time was soak mason jars. I'd leave them for 5 or 10 minutes in Star San solution, pull them out, put the yeast in there, gently cap them, throw them in the fridge. Every single time, I never had it contaminated. It was always super clean yeast that always propped up very quickly, when I threw that yeast in a starter. I never used Everclear. I never washed them in a lot of people did the hot dishwasher thing. And I think that's a great idea. I just didn't want to waste the time doing that. I would just soak them in Star San. So that's my approach. Maybe my little anecdote will help soothe some of your worries about contamination. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say relax, don't worry, have a yeast starter.
There you go.
It sounds like what you're doing seems fine. I don't do a heat cycle in a dishwasher. And if you do that, I would make sure you wash them really good because I'd be actually worried about some residual detergent being on there. What I do is once I pitch my yeast from the jar and the jar is now empty, I rinse it out real good in the sink, and then I soak that in PBW, and then wash that out. And the PBW does a really good job. I don't typically have to scrub it, and then they're dry and it's time to harvest again. And so then I'll soak that in Star San and pour the yeast in there, and then maybe I'll give it like the Star Stan spray bottle I have. Maybe I'll spray the top of the yeast just to kill off any sort of rogue stuff in the air that might have fallen on it during the transfer process. But like you, I have harvested a bazillion times. I actually have had one of them go bad, but I'm not so sure that it was a function of the storing, but maybe it just took it too many generations. So that would be the other thing, is maybe after your fourth or fifth generation, throw it away and start over.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's, you know, I think it's a totally valid thing to worry about contamination, especially when it comes to, you know, yeast starters and all of that stuff. I don't think it is as scary. I don't think it's as big of an issue as we've made it. But again, risk reduction, it feels good for most of us, and so you might as well. So, all right, this next question is going to be a good one.
All right, so they also ask, Mexican food, what does it better, California or Texas?
Yo, look, so you have spent more time in Texas than I have, Jordan. I have been to Texas. I have not spent much time there. I have definitely not eaten Mexican food there, so I cannot comment on this. Where I live in Fresno, I throw a rock in any direction and I hit like 9 out of 10 to 10 out of 10 Mexican food. It is amazing where I live. It's one of my favorite styles of food, ethnically speaking. I absolutely love it. So I'm a proud California Mexican food guy here, even though I've never eaten I know I've had Tex-Mex, which I love, but it is not what I'm talking about here in Fresno. We have some authentic, delicious Mexican food here.
So I'm terrible with favorites, and I kind of like both for different reasons. And I think they're both fantastic Mexican food states. I think that I really like Tex-Mex, and I think that in Texas it tends to be pretty consistent, and so it's that I really like about the Mexican food scene in Texas. Whereas in California, it seems that there's just so much California taquerias that there could be a little more variable.
Sure.
And so I would say maybe that Texas I found to be a little more consistent, but I've had higher highs in California. And so I really like both, and they kind of scratch a different itch.
Yeah. Oh my God. The taquerias we have around here. I mean, that's what I'm saying though, is there's a place in town. I have a fun little story about a Mexican restaurant. It's called Country Fair Cafe. It is down way south from where I live. I mean, it takes us 15, 20 minutes to drive there. Still in the city of Fresno. It used to be an old school, like Sunday morning diner. My grandpa would take me there before Sunday school when I was a kid. And he you know, he was that guy with cowboy hat, called all the servers there hun type of deal. It was old school. They got that when they closed up, 30 years ago or so. A Mexican family bought Country Fair Cafe, and they just turned it into this cash-only Mexican restaurant with all of their family's old recipes. And I'm telling you, you go in there, and for $15, you're going to eat like you are in Mexico. It is phenomenal. Best Mexican food I've ever had in my life. We're going there in about 2 weeks when my brother comes to town. And they still call it Country Fair Cafe. So it's kind of a nostalgic place for me, right? Because I grew up going to this place with my grandfather. But it is, I'm telling you, like I feel like I'm underselling it, and but I know I'm not. This place is phenomenal. If you're driving through Fresno, look up Country Fair Cafe. Trust me, you will not regret it. All right. Arthur Olcott asks or says, I typically keg my beer, but from time to time I do bottle some. Over the years, I've read various conflicting advice with regards to oxygen scrubbing bottle caps and how to correctly sanitize and use them. Some people say to just put them all in your sanitizer at the start and take them out as needed when capping bottles, while others say this renders the O2 scrubbing ineffective as the cap has done its work on pulling O2 out of the sanitizer and can't scrub it anymore, so from the beer. I do something in the middle by spraying one cap with sanitizer immediately before capping the bottle. What are your opinions on this, and what do you do with caps when bottling? This is one of the most specific questions that we've gotten so far in doing these Brü A's. What do you think, Jordan?
You know, it's funny. I actually had a homebrew club member ask us to do an experiment on this very issue. So I have heard this as well, and I have always just sanitized my caps. I believe I've used both oxygen scrubbing and standard, and just always sanitize out of a course of habit. But we haven't tested it, so I unfortunately can't provide a really evidence-based piece of anecdote for you here. But honestly, if you're keeping the caps it's in a closed container, and if the recommendation is not to sanitize them, I would say that that's probably going to be fine, especially if you're not, constantly shaking the bottle up and having the liquid touch the top of the cap. But if you're if you're bottling carbonated beer with a beer gun, you're not supposed to cap on foam, and at that point, your liquid's going to touch it anyway. So I would assume at that point you might as well sanitize them. So I think that it's probably fine to follow the factory instructions here, but this is something that we should probably dig into at some point.
Yeah, I love that. You just do what they tell you to do, right? So I don't make bottle caps. I'm not a bottle cap salesperson. So I actually looked into this one so I could get you what I feel is some pretty, on point information, Arthur. The caps that you're referring to, I know I've bought them before. I know exactly what they are. They contain this special liner, right? Often with iron powder or ascorbic acid. It's one of those two. I could not find that they're all made the same way. But these chemically bind oxygen in the bottle's headspace. The scavenging agent is typically moisture activated, like you said, Arthur, meaning it begins working as soon as it gets wet. But the chemical reaction occurs over several hours or even days, I read, not minutes. So you could drop them in a bucket of sanitizer and pull them out, and it really shouldn't be an issue. That chemical reaction that's scavenging the oxygen is going to take much longer than the few minutes that they're sitting in your bucket. Now, yes, if you're throwing them in there and forget to bottle your beer and come back the next day, they're probably going to be ineffective. But look, when I was bottling, I stopped using the oxygen scrubbing ones because I felt like they were way too expensive, and I didn't notice any difference or impact. Like you said, Jordan, if you're capping on foam and you've got a nice sanitized regular bottle cap, you're probably just as good. I almost feel like it's a little bit of a gimmick. I'll admit it. Like I just don't know if it's necessary to use those O2 scrubbing caps.
I'll have to add to the list. All right. So Leaf asks, cold side oxidation is something we're all trying to avoid these days. Personally, I've been using the push star sand out with CO2 method, but I've heard on your podcast and read other articles about sodium or potassium metabisulfite as an easy button to minimize or eliminate oxidation. If you had the choice of one or the other, which would you choose? I ask this because it feels senseless to fill and purge a keg only to open it and expose it to oxygen just to add an antioxidant.
So I don't know if I would say that it's senseless because we've already mentioned it twice. In this episode, risk reduction, man. I mean, do whatever you can to ensure that you do not make a beer that has cold side oxidation. That's awful. I am definitely, though, on board. In answering your question, Leaf, I'm definitely on board with purging the keg with CO2, mostly because it's super easy and it's free most of the time for me since I use CO2 that's being naturally produced during fermentation anyway, not from a tank. I have nothing against SMB or PMB. I keep it on hand all the time. And I would definitely use it in certain scenarios. Like if I forgot to purge a keg and I wanted to get this beer in the keg right away, or if I'm making a hazy IPA, I'd probably double up, purge the keg and use chemical antioxidants. But if I had to just choose one, I'm going with mechanical over chemical because it's what I know.
100%. I actually agree. I think it feels a little senseless to open a keg and expose it to oxygen just to add an antioxidant. Yeah. If you have solid methods of closed transfers, you do not need this. I'm not using PMB or SMB because I'm doing a closed transfer method. However, it's a good little piece of correction if you have an incident. For example, like our previous question asker who had to open up the keg and change out the dip tube. And so in cases like that, you can then use it as a little bit of a reactionary measure. But if you have solid practices on the front end, I see no reason to open the keg and add PMB or SMB. That being said, it is possible to add, fining agents, etc., in a closed manner. So you can just push those in with either like a little injector or a carb cap via in a bottle via the gas in post. So if you really, really wanted to, you could make a solution and push it in the gas in post in a pretty oxygen-free way. If you really, really want to go both ways.
Yeah, it sounds like you and I are on the same page. If you have the ability to mechanically reduce exposure to oxygen, just do that. I think you're going to notice an improvement, particularly on your hoppy beers anyways. Keep some metabis, if you're okay with sulfites, of course. Keep some around. Just it's nice to have on hand, and it's super cheap. All right, Owen Dawson says, I've read that Guinness is a kettle-soured beer. I've read the same thing, actually. I recently listened to an old episode on quick sour methods and thought Guinness was notably absent from the discussion. I make a regular stout that I always have on nitro. Sorry, not sorry for living up to the Irish stereotype. How would I go about trying kettle souring on my stout recipe? I'm leaving this one completely to you, Jordan, because I have no clue how he would go about doing that.
So I am not a Guinness expert, but what I recall is that there is a conspiracy theory that they make 2 batches of Guinness and blend a small portion of a soured version with the straight version. And I want to say I might have even heard maybe Brettanomyces. So but I think it's like the theory is something like 95% 5 or, some really small amount. So if you wanted to try this, I would say make 2 batches or reserve 1 gallon or something like that and kettle sour that and then blend them. But if you go on YouTube, you can find old videos of them serving Guinness from the war eras. And there are videos of them pouring draft pints, and they'll pour mostly from one tap on the left and then a little splash from the tap on the right. The conspiracy theory being is that the little dash from the right tap was soured. So I guess that'd be another way to go about it. Is you could make a standard batch and then a either a full batch or smaller batch of a kettle soured one, and then you could blend on demand and see if you could try to dial that in from the tap.
That's what I would do. That was going to be my suggestion. I haven't seen those videos, but I want to now. I would just make like a 1 gallon even, or however much you want. Make your stout, your Guinness, clone stout or whatever, and maybe kettle sour it. However, throw in some, some lactic acid bacteria, let it sour up, and then just dial it in off the tap. Add a little bit of that stuff and then add your normal stout and see how it tastes, and just whenever you get it, then if you in the future, if you want to do a full blend for a keg or whatever, you can, but just using the ratios that work. But it's an interesting concept. I really like the idea of blending those just to create like a nuanced kind of tartness or whatever.
But I think either way, we agree that kettle souring the entire batch is probably going to be overkill.
Yes.
I guess maybe you could try to dial in the perfect pH so it's not like a full-blown sour or tart kettle sour, but it seems blending is the way to go.
Yeah, that'd be so difficult. I think that would be just, you'd have to like kettle sour it, and then as soon as it gets to I wouldn't even go based off of pH. I'd go based off of flavor, and then you have to boil it, and now you're just getting into weird territory. I would just do the blending.
Mm-hmm. All right, last one for this session. Lucan Woodworth asks, I was listening to the latest Patreon Q&A episode with John Palmer, and he mentioned the possible culprit for cold side oxidation in hazy IPA could be residual star sand in the purged keg. I'd never heard that before, and it made my head spin. When I sanitize my kegs, I never focus on tipping them upside down for a substantial amount of time to make sure all the star sand is drained out. I just dump the vast majority of it in the sink and call it good. Have you ever heard of star sand causing oxidation in hoppy beer styles? Can we get an experiment on it?
So, I have absolutely heard of this, and in fact, we have done one experiment that was centered around this concept, but the style was International Pale Lager. I believe Cade did this one, actually. So it was not the most applicable for this specific concern with hazy IPA. That said, while I've certainly heard the claims shared by Palmer, without a doubt, it's what inspired Cade to do this experiment. I'm pretty sure it's mostly been debunked. The idea behind it sure sounds valid, though, that star sand bubbles contain oxygen. So even when you push that liquid out with CO2 of those kegs, those oxygen-filled bubbles remain and can potentially oxidize the beer. One problem with this is that at least for most of us, we're not opening our purged kegs. So we don't really know how many bubbles remain in there, but it's likely not enough to have an impact. That's at least my... that experiment kind of showed this. Again, International Pale Lager, not a hazy IPA. Now, when I first heard this claim years ago, I did this little test. It was just a side-by-side. I was in my garage for a while, thinking, well, let's see what this does. I took 2 glasses of a hazy IPA that I had made for another experiment, 2 pints, full pints, right? Set them down together. Into one of them, I just added a few ounces of star sand solution that I keep in a bucket. I keep it around 3 to 4 weeks to swap it out. I covered both of them with coasters, and I just left them alone overnight. And I thought, hazy IPA, we know it turns purple. I'm curious if the one with star sand in it is going to oxidize faster or maybe even be worse. The next day, they looked identical. They were both starting to turn a little bit purple. That you would expect that. Poured them out of a tap. They're sitting in, glasses. They started to have the telltale smell, that kind of sweet, sickly smell. There was nothing different about the one with star sand, though. Now, I also have a very I told Jordan this right before we started recording this. My dumbass just brewed the first beer in my new brewery last week, and I went out yesterday to cold crash it, and I completely forgot to swap out my blow-off tube with CO. I keep CO2 at 1 psi, and I'll just put it on the fermenter while I'm cold crashing. It sucked in a good half a quart or so of Star San solution that I was using as my blow-off in my blow-off vessel. So if it has if it's the Star San and not necessarily just the bubbles, Lucan, I'll have some feedback for you in that article that I write about this beer in a few weeks. So we'll just have to see on that one.
This is something that I think Scott Janish really made a lot of waves talking about like 10 years ago. And his recommendation was to switch to a non-foaming sanitizer. So 5-Star, their non-foaming is called SaniClean. And so that's what I use for this very reason. I recall another thing that people were doing back in the haze craze 10 years ago is they were actually cutting the little quote dip tube that's on the gas inline so that it was flat against the top of the post, and then when they turned it upside down, they're able to get all of that out by pushing the little poppet in. I've never gone that far. What I do is I just try to since I'm using floating dip tubes, I just kind of rock the keg around with CO2 attached and just try to pull out as much as I possibly can. And since I'm using a non-foaming sanitizer that I fill to the brim, there really shouldn't be a whole lot of oxygen inside with that method. So I think that I relate to your paranoia, and I would recommend switching to SaniClean.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. And I remember, God, this must have been 2016 or 17. I was talking to somebody, just a sales rep from 5-Star, and I said, he was talking about SaniClean and how that's being used by commercial brewers more and more. Back then, of course, haze craze, all that stuff. And I said, why do you even make one that's bubbles? And he goes, because the bubbles are what do what we want it to do. Those bubbles stick to the side of your vessel, your fermenter, your keg, whatever it is. And that keeps the contact of that phosphoric acid, with the vessel, and that does the sanitizing. For what purposes like we're talking about with SaniClean, you're going to have to fill that vessel up higher or whatever. You're going to have to spray it on there so that it sticks to the vessel. Those bubbles are actually intentional, right? They're there to do the work. So just something to keep in mind. I do think that maybe it could have some impact. We just haven't been able to show it, but we haven't done it with a hazy IPA yet either. I think that's an interesting future experiment. We do have to take a short break. We're going to be right back with more Brü A. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Alrighty, time to answer some more questions. Go ahead and start us off, Jordan.
All right, our buddy Will Arbor asks, I've been a fan since almost the beginning of the website. I've been reading about single variables being tested and seeing many of them come back with both significant and non-significant results. With many of these single variables being tested multiple times, have you ever thought about testing 2 variables at once? Maybe starting with variables that have been tested multiple times but come back as both significant and non-significant. This may satisfy all the people who say, well, I bet if you did this, it would have come back significant.
Are you one of those people, Will? Yeah, we have talked about this quite a lot internally among the contributors of Brülosophy. We've actually done a few experiments on this. I like the idea. Besides coming up with article names that aren't too long, like that's kind of an issue. The only other issue is that every time we've done what we call stacked variable experiment, so we start adding more than just the single variable, we get more complaints about those than we do the single variable ones, because people are starting to say, well, you could have done this. Why didn't you do this? You should have done it this way. And we're sitting here going, this is why you isolate the variable. It's so that you don't have all those questions in there. Now, I do believe that there are probably some things that we've tested that would come back, maybe, let's just hypothetical, right? Something that we've tested like mash temperature might come back significant if we had included some other variable. I don't know what that is, but if we included that along with the mash temperature, maybe it would, for example, make a hot mashed beer, the warm mash beer, taste sweeter, as opposed to tasting the same as one that's mashed cooler. I don't know, but I think it's worthy of exploration, and it certainly opens up way more options for us. I mean, if we start doing that, then we're going to be around for hundreds of years. We'll just put it that way.
Well, I think it kind of depends on what you consider a variation or variable, right? Because there are certain variables that if you pull one lever versus the other, you're going to have a stronger OG. And so then if we pitch the same amount of yeast into both, yes, it's the same. They each get 1 pack or 2 packs or whatever, but the pitch rate is different between the two.
Go. Yeah.
Or if you decoct one but not the other, not only is the OG different, but your IBUs are inevitably different because you're putting the same amount of hops into different volumes of liquid. And so we're already introducing multiple variables a lot of times. And so I think to the extent that we could control these things to make all other things equal, if anything, we're actually getting down to really just one variable, but modulating things in a smart way to try to reduce variable-induced variance. And so I am definitely on board with this as long as it makes sense.
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Is how do we make it make sense? The more variables you introduce, the more convoluted it gets. That goes for more than just brewing. That's life, right? As when it gets convoluted, you start introducing also opportunities for people having issues with the way we approached it. And so we're not worried about that necessarily, but we want to keep it as controlled and as clean as possible. But yes, Will, that is something that we have been talking a lot about. It's something that we started doing a little bit of, and I'm sure you guys are going to see a lot more combined variable or stacked variable experiments in the future. Sebastian Berg says, watching the YouTube channel Mean Brews, great YouTube channel, I came across a comment about not being afraid of the salts regarding Burtonizing brewing water. If my memory serves me right, Burtonizing water has been discussed as something born out of myth, like the IPA being bitter because of the long shipping time to India, or at least a procedure belonging to brewing history. Do you have any experience brewing with very high amounts of sulfates, and if the impact on beer is suitable or pleasurable in British styles?
So I actually had a really recent experience reading into this because our local homebrew store here, FH Steinbart, is sadly closing, and I'm absolutely devastated. And so one of my friends that works there, she brought a bunch of old magazines they had kicking around, just like, hey, does anyone want these? We don't need them anymore. And so I grabbed an old Zymergy from the last couple of years because I don't have Zymergy magazine subscription anymore. And they had an article on Burtonizing the water, or actually it was really on brewing in Burton, and they had a whole bit on the water. And so I've got the water profile for you here. This is crazy. This is an analysis of the Burton well water. It's 352 parts per million calcium, 320 total carbonate, 820 sulfate, and 16 chloride. Marshall, that is 51-1 sulfate to chloride ratio. That is crazy. That article goes on to say that even as late as the 70s, brewers were pre-boiling their water to precipitate some of that stuff out. And so I think that I would never, ever, ever recommend someone recreate the water analysis results from the Burton well profile with 820 ppm sulfate and 16 calcium. I would, 50-1, that's crazy. So I think that there is probably some reason to have a higher sulfate to chloride ratio for some styles, but maybe do something like 4-1 or even 10-1. Yeah. I don't know. I think that 800 ppm sulfate, 50-1 chloride, that's just crazy. And I do not see that making a good beer.
I am a huge proponent of the sulfate to chloride ratio, and to the point that is all I adjust my water with nowadays is just gypsum and calcium chloride. I get people want to use some Epsom because you can increase that sulfate level without impacting your calcium. You do impact that magnesium, so be careful, especially if you have bowel issues. In this case, though, the total hardness of Burton water is like over 1,000 ppm. I mean, that is crazy hard water. I have Burtonized water, and I've done it twice that I can remember at least. The first time was because the homebrew shop, I started brewing in the early 2000s. They sold IPA salts that they would give to us, and it was based on, if you're using water that you bought from the store. Our water up there was basically, Pilsen water where I lived. You could just add this to a 5-gallon batch of beer and you'd get Burton IPA water. And I don't remember my perception of that. I just remember doing it. I'm still brewing, so it clearly wasn't that bad. But then, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I thought, I'm going to try. People had been talking about water. I had heard Martin on Martin Brungard, the guy who makes the Brew and Water spreadsheet. He was on a podcast and had mentioned what you just said, that he's like, man, people have this idea that they need to match the regional water profile. He's like, if you do that, you're actually not brewing the way the brewers there brewed. They pre-boiled. They did what they could to make their water better to brew with, but as we do, we're just trying to make it like they made it in the old days. So I hear him saying that stuff. And so I thought, I'm going to try it. I want to see what it comes out. That was one of the only beers, and it was an IPA. It was one of the only beers I've ever brewed that I felt had a genuinely metallic aftertaste. That kind of like you suck it on pennies aftertaste. I would not recommend doing that. I'm with you, Jordan. It just sounds, it's kind of fun if you like to experiment and mess around. Make a 1-gallon batch, see what you think. Just build your water up. You look at like Mike Tasty McDole's IPA water profile. He's going like 300 ppm sulfate, but he's not. His calcium is in that 50 to 150 ppm range. His chloride is probably around 50 to 100, I believe, if I recall correctly. It's nothing like 800 ppm sulfate. That's just wild to me.
Yeah, I think that, there's a lot of things they used to do back in the day that we don't do anymore for good reason, and this is one of them. So maybe more like 10 to 1. I think 50 to 1's a bit overkill.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. So our other friend, Whiskey Will Babcock, asks, in later episodes of the podcast, you seem to become slightly jaded concerning the homebrewing industry, especially the AHA, compared to early episodes where you would sing their praises. Do you think pulling the curtain back on the wizard and learning more of the inner workings of things as you got more and more involved has any influence on that? Do you wish you could unknow some of the things you've learned?
I really appreciate this question because it allows me to kind of speak on some, real things. And I'm sure you're not the only one, Will, who has noticed the kind of shift in the way we talked about it. I'm not a resentful guy. I don't hold grudges. I don't want to live a life like that. But yes, things change, and I'm not going to pretend like when we advertise for someone, if somebody's paying us money to advertise for them, I'll tell them that we're only doing this because we believe in you. I've said no more than I've said yes. There's a reason that you're hearing dynamic ads on this podcast now more than you are baked in ads from other people out there. There are folks who will reach out and ask us to advertise for them, and we don't use their gear or we don't like their gear. And so we say, no, I'm not going to be a shill. With the AHA, we had a very good relationship for a while. And then things started to change in the way that all of you out there are very well aware of. They've talked about it. My perspective on them was driven largely by what I viewed. I'll just put it that I shared with so many other people that it seemed like, their focus was moving off of or away from homebrewing and homebrewers, even though they're the American Homebrewers Association. And it seemed like they just, we were a number that made them money, that paid for other stuff. And I didn't feel like it was really benefiting us anymore. And that is not a diss to the current AHA. I, in fact, just got off 2 weeks ago. I was on a call with the new board of the AHA, and I'm really excited for what they've got going. This is fully a function of the fact that they've parted ways with the Brewers Association. And I don't want to talk shit. I'm not going to, diss anybody specifically. But the Brewers Association has a very specific goal, and their aims just did not align with homebrewers. And you'll hear stories about, the higher ups in the BA who were basically saying what I'm saying now, that hey, this AHA is tiny. They're not a big part of what we're doing. I heard rumors that they were even thinking about just killing it all together. That I didn't like that. And so when I was talking bad about it, it was just that normal stuff. And yes, I get it. We have a platform, we have a podcast and a website. So it might sound like we're speaking with some, secret information or private or like some authority. And that was not the intention. We were just commenting on the same stuff a lot of other, longtime AHA members were talking about and noticing. And the fact they parted ways again with the BA, I think gives a lot of hope. Only time's going to tell to see, what they're able to make of it. But the fact that, they're already planning a homebrew con and they're really just committed to making the organization, to bringing homebrewers back into it and making them the focus, I'm very, very hopeful. So that is there stuff that I wish I could unknow about that process and that dynamic? Not really. I'm not an ignorance is bliss type of guy. I like knowing things. I think it helps us to inform the way that we approach stuff. I will say that if there's anything that kind of surprised me as Brülosophy was growing, it's that some of the people, none of us are celebrities. Look, I get that you hear our voices on this, and some people, oh my God, I met so-and-so, I met John Palmer, I met, these people. I've been kind of surprised with some of the folks who have made a name for themselves, their behavior and the way that they act and treat others. But it's not on a hate level. It's just kind of you're different than I thought you'd be. Do I wish I could unknow them? I wouldn't say so. I love 99% of what this industry and this hobby have to offer and the way that we've been treated in it. So
I have zero contempt for the AHA, and I've some of my most amazing homebrewing experiences have been directly because of them. So I really wish them the best. The only reason I'm not really active in the AHA anymore is because I'm active with Brülosophy. And so I just don't have, time in my hobby, time frame to be really active in multiple organizations. And so I'm not competing in a ton of competitions anymore. And you need an AHA membership to compete in the National Homebrew Competition. After winning a couple golds in the NHC final round a couple years ago, I kind of felt like I proved my point. And, but if Brülosophy wasn't a thing, I'd probably be competing a lot more. So I really wish them the best, and I hope they can bring the conferences and the experiences back to their former glory. But homebrew as a whole has gone downhill in terms of the interest and, business side of things. And so I really hope that they can help us bring us back to our former glory. And I will participate to the extent that I have time.
Yeah, when they first announced that HomebrewCon was coming back and it was going to be its own event, not a part of GABF, I thought that was a terrible idea. But remember, that was when they were still a part of the BA. When I heard that they're doing HomebrewCon again, I was pretty excited. I was looking into going, and then they announced the date. The only reason you're not going to find me at HomebrewCon this year is because my family takes priority, and we make a big deal out of holidays, and Father's Day is one of those. We've already got plans for it, so I can't make it. If it were another, I talked to them about this, so it's not like this is a secret. I mean, I'm also saying it on a podcast. They're very well aware of this. They hear this from several people. They when I was talking to them, a couple weeks ago, they had just had a listening ear. There was a lot of, thank you for that information. Please keep sharing this when you hear back from fans of the show. Let us know what they're saying. We want to make this about homebrewers. I feel like that mentality was probably how the AHA got started. I think they kind of moved away from that as homebrewing blew up, 10 years ago, and they're moving back into it now. And again, I'm very hopeful for it. So good things are to come. I'm confident of that. All right, Gregory Horowitz, he has two questions. The first one, he says, do you ever go through phases of burnout where you just back away from brewing? Jordan, I feel like you maybe don't.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been brewing for 15 years or so now, pretty consistently.
Yeah.
But occasionally I'll be like, man, I'm kind of bored of this. Like maybe I should do something else. And, so I won't brew a beer for a month or something like that. And then, after about a month rolls by, I'm like, wow, I got to get back in the brew house. So my burnout has never been long lived, but, I might get to the point where I don't need to brew every week. And just once a month or so sufficiently scratches the itch without achieving burnout.
Yeah. My what we'll call, stepping away from brewing had nothing to do with burnout. I was wholly bummed out to not have the time to do it. There's a very legitimate, I can tie it to very legitimate reasons though. When we started the Brew Lab, that added an entire new job for me to do with Brülosophy, and that happened at the times, the very small windows of time that I had to brew. I filled that with doing the brew lab. And then as soon as, the only thing that came from, I guess, good that came from Cade, having to cut out on the brew lab was that it opened up this time. Well, what did we do? We brought in Martin and we started the Brülosophy show. So that contributed then to me having more stuff to do. Now that I'm where I'm at and I have my garage, I am so excited. Getting back into it. Now I'm going to make some mistakes because I haven't brewed my own beer in 2 years or so. It is so fun. Everything that I did and I did it on, with people on Teams with me for the Patreon Brew Day thing. And it was just so fun. The smells and the engaging in the process. I loved it. And I don't know if I'll ever experience genuine burnout from brewing. But I haven't yet. And I'm just glad to be able to do it right now. All right. Question 2 from Gregory. He says, I recall hearing Marshall mention that people just come over to drink his beer. They sure do. How do you preserve your family's privacy? People come to your house, or do you usually take your beer with you, Jordan?
Well, I don't, post on nextdoor.com, hey, free beer at this address. But, when friends are over, I'm always like cajoling them like, hey, let me twist your arm. You got to do this experiment. But yeah, I don't do like open invites for rando neighbors by any means.
Just random people off the street. I've never done that. But what I have done is, we have a really cool beer and brewing community where I live, Fresno Clovis area. I'll just hop on to a Facebook group and I know most of the people who are going to come over anyways. And I'll just throw up an invite. Hey, we're doing, beer tasting, explain a little bit about Brülosophy. The people who come, it's always the same people who come over. They're actually friends of mine. So it's not like I'm inviting random people over. Every once in a while, I'll get a message from somebody I've never met in person. And they're like, dude, big fan. I'd love to come be a part of it. And I'll absolutely invite them over. They're not coming into my house and like rummaging through stuff. They're staying in the garage. They're staying in the garage. Gregory, come on. Yeah. And to me, my wife couldn't care less. Sometimes she'll come out and hang out with us. She doesn't drink beer, but she'll just come kick it with us. I'm not one of those people who's terribly concerned about privacy either. It's just a characteristic of me, I guess. And so that has never been anything that I've been concerned about. In fact, I've made some really good friends just off of these invites where people come over and hang out at my house. And so I'm a social person. I tend to be somewhat gregarious, I guess. To me, like that's where I get my energy from is meeting people, hanging out with them, and especially drinking beer with them. So, yep, no concerns there. If my wife were ever to come to me though and be like, I'm really concerned about our privacy, you got to stop inviting people over, I would just stop. It's not like a thing. I could take beer somewhere else. So,
all right, moving on. So Jeremiah Pickard asks, during Marshall's live brew, it came up how processes and priorities evolve as we stay in the hobby, from having the most complicated setup with all the gadgets to downsizing to keep it basic and less convoluted. As you've progressed in this hobby, do you find yourself focusing more on production, process, or specific aspect of brewing, or a combination? What other ways have your view of beer and homebrewing evolved as you've continued with the hobby?
That's a good question, and I'm not quite sure how to answer this. I feel like okay, so Jeremiah happened to be at my first brew day in the brewery last week as a part of this Patreon brew day thing that we do, and so he got to see it. So I'm going to answer this as though I didn't already answer it for you, Jeremiah. I developed a routine that works for me, and it's not motivated by like a drive to be very quick. I did a completely normal 60-minute mash, 60-minute boil. I wasn't brewing a short and shoddy batch. There was nothing like that. What I don't like is engaging in what could potentially be an unnecessary step that adds more time or effort that if I don't need to do it. That's just a function of who I am. This goes for my real job. It goes for brewing stuff. It goes for my family. I'm an efficiency guy, and that drives a lot of the decisions that I make. So I do brew in a bag because, one, I've made excellent beer doing brew in a bag or brew in a basket, whatever it is you do. I've also made great beer doing batch sparging. I've actually brewed using a fly sparge method. I can't tell a difference, so I'm going with brew in a bag as a simple example. That's really what motivates my brewing. Now, I think there's a place for, really getting into, this is a hobby after all, right? Really getting into the intricacies of brewing and building out, a small version of what could ultimately be, like a professional system in your garage. there are people who that's the hobby that's the part of the hobby that they love the most, right? Is tinkering with gear. And I don't want them to feel like, well, you shouldn't no, go do it, man. That's what a hobby is for. Have fun with it. If that's your thing. That's not my thing at all. I like being able to go out to my garage and I have this nice, small, quaint setup that I can make delicious beer on. That's what gets me going. So that's what I would say. I would argue that electric brewing systems, as they're so prolific these days, they're everywhere. I feel like everybody is brewing on electric nowadays. I'd say that's a pretty advanced piece of gear, especially compared to when you and I started brewing, Jordan, when everyone was brewing out of converted cooler MLTs. They're expensive. I guess they're getting cheaper, which is great, but that's pretty advanced. A lot of people view that now as just baseline brewing gear. So,
well, if I think about how my priorities have evolved, initially it was learning and, understanding ingredients, processes, et cetera. And so now that I have come a long way 15 years later and really understand the processes, the ingredients, et cetera, I'm really focused on making the, truly world-class beer in my basement. But I don't want that to come, at the expense of foregoing optimization to the wind. So through Brülosophy and elsewhere, I've learned what really seems to matter and what you can get away with. And so sparging is a great example. I'm a no sparge, full volume brewer. But on the flip side, I think that yeast and fermentation is really important. And so I pitch a lot more yeast and ferment a lot colder than most of the Brülosophy contributors. So, but at the same time, fermenting cold and pitching 2 packs of yeast isn't hard.
No.
Right. And exactly. So decoction, on the other hand, is challenging. And so I will only decoct a couple times a year. I will not decoct every batch of beer. Using a shit ton of hops makes a hoppier beer. And so, sure, there's a cost involved in that, but it's not harder. And so finding what really seems to matter and what seems to make world-class beer, but being smart about, not over flexing every single muscle and focusing on what really matters, even if that might cost a little more.
God, that's such a great response that I fully agree with, even though we have a different approach to brewing. I mean, I think what drives us is the same, the impetus is very similar, but the way that we do things is still different. So hopefully that suffices as 2 good answers. And I think it really does convey what we're trying to get across here. Next question comes from Paul Beckers, who says, this is such a good one for you, Jordan. He says, how much of an impact do hop survivables have on the finished beer? And is this concept a good means of selecting dry hops that'll have a harmonious flavor and aroma profile?
All right. So yeah, survivables, that was a bit of a buzzword, 5-10 years ago. I know there are some pro brewers that still really lean into that. I don't know how common of a theorem that is these days. As I understand it, hop survivables are really focused on picking hops that you would use in your whirlpool. And so I don't know that people are using survivable charts as much when picking their dry hops. So I would say that if that's something you're really interested in, look at those survivable charts and use the ones with high survivables in your whirlpool. Thus, if you're trying to mix it up and have different hops in whirlpool and dry hop, those that have low survivables are the ones that you would want to use in your dry hop. But me personally, I just focus on the hop varieties that I really like. I did mess around with survivables for a little bit in the beginning when that first came out. And a lot of the ones that are super high in survivables, I don't even actually like, I don't think, like Idaho 7. So I'm more focused on the varieties that I like and being smart about when and how much I use.
Yeah. I'm not even going to speak to this because I feel like you're way smarter about this than I am. I've never focused on hop survivables. When it was that buzzword a few years ago, it was one of those things where I was like, we're not even going to be using this term in a few years. So that's my cynicism, I guess. But I agree with you. If I'm going for hops, I'm not thinking about survivables as much as I am, do I like this hop and what it's done for me in the past? So that's the approach I take.
Okay. Solemn Tim asks, I've been using Star Sans for as long as I can remember, making batches that I keep for around a week. I was recently looking up some info on the 5-Star Chemicals website and saw on the FAQ for Star San, we do not recommend using it if it has been in solution longer than an hour. What gives? It's not expensive, but making and dumping a gallon or more every time I brew would be a waste of money. What are your thoughts?
They're a business who want you to buy I'm not dissing them for this, but they want you to buy their product more often. I get it. I think the common wisdom or the conventional wisdom when it comes to dumping star sand is that when it either looks gross or the pH rises above 3.5, probably best to dump it and make a new batch. What I've found is that I kept a bucket of star sand around for over 6 months one time just to test this out. It took that long for it to get to like 3.2 pH. So you can keep it around for a long time. It's that lower pH. It's the acidity from that phosphoric acid that does the sanitizing, right? Now, if you're like cleaning stuff in your star sand solution, not saying that I've done that a lot, yeah, maybe dump it sooner than later. I don't keep mine around for 6 months anymore. I swap it out every 3 to 4 weeks just because, like you said, Solemn Tim, that it's cheap and I like to have clean star sand around. Another issue people have brought up is if you have harder water, it can turn white. I asked, again, I was talking to 5-star folks about a decade ago, and they told me, they're like, that's not really a big issue, but it can leave a film on stuff if you leave stuff in there for too long, so you might want to watch out for that. As long as that pH is below 3.5, though, you're good to keep using it.
Yeah, and the other one I heard was that if it turns murky, that's the time to toss it. I keep mine around forever. Granted, I do use the 5-star SanaClean product. There might be some sort of like legal health code reasons that they recommend that as well for a professional setting. But I am not struggling with infected beers, and I'm using my SanaClean for months probably. I have a keg always full of it, and I'll push it around from keg to keg to keg for keg purging and sanitization. But again, the SanaClean is only touching clean equipment.
Exactly.
It's not like there's gunk there. So if you're clean equipment going in, sanitized coming out, I think that you're probably fine until it turns murky.
Exactly. And that was my final point as well is, SanaClean, Star San, whatever sanitizer you're using, it is not a cleaner. It's a sanitizer. So make sure that you're cleaning stuff first and then sanitizing it, and you should be able to prolong a bucket of that. Now, I will say if you're using iodophor, which is great, it's actually, I believe there's evidence that it's actually a stronger, disinfectant and sanitizer than even Star San. It will absolutely deteriorate over time. I think it's like 1 week. But the easiest way to tell that you need to stop using it is that if it's lighter than what you would consider like a tea color, then that has dissipated. The actual iodine in there has dissipated, and you need to make another batch. I only use it when if in scenarios where, for example, I have some PET carboys that I need to. I tend to use them for like cider and stuff. They've just been sitting in my garage dry for a long time. I'll wash those things out, and then I'll fill them up with iodophor, dump that out, and then I do Star San after that before putting the juice in there to ferment it. So I keep both on hand. I'm probably going to move to SanaClean just because Jordan does, and he makes some of the best beer I've ever had. So that's my take on that one. But you can keep your Star San around for a long time. Don't worry about it. All right, next question comes from Chuck Miller, who says there are many opinions on boil time sanitizing, such as running wort through a hose or CFC, that's a counterflow chiller, at X degrees for Y minutes. But can we use pasteurization calculations, time and temperature to quantify things? If not pasteurization parameters, are there other valid heuristics?
Yeah, I think this is a great idea, actually. I don't actually do the pasteurization calculations. I just always clean my chiller, etc., as soon as I'm done brewing, and will run some hot, boiling wort through the pump during the brew day, etc. But I'm just doing it for like a couple minutes at a time. I'm not actually running the pasteurization calcs. But I would imagine that those would be a surefire way, and if you're really going to be that paranoid about it.
Yeah, my understanding, again, I am by no means an expert on this topic, but my understanding is the reason the common recommendation is to start sanitizing your chiller, for example, whether that's putting your IC in the boiling wort or running the boiling wort through a CFC for 15 minutes is because of pasteurization stuff. Now, it's probably overkill. My understanding is that at 212 Fahrenheit, it's something like 6 minutes will ensure complete pasteurization or killing off of any bugs that might be in those in a chiller or on a chiller. But we do it for 15 minutes just to make 100% sure that once you chill that wort, there's nothing left on that chiller or in that chiller that can contaminate it. So I do think that it plays into that. But homebrewers, I mean, if you really want to dig into it, I don't think it'd be very difficult to calculate exactly how much time you need to do it. I'm more of an overkill guy, though. I feel like we've we've harped on this quite a bit in this episode. I'm going to go 15 minutes no matter what, in part because I've never had an issue with it. Two, it's part of my routine. I don't even think about it when I'm brewing. But mostly it's just always worked. So that's what I do.
All right. Final question, Jason May. And I love this question. As a younger homebrewer in his mid-20s, what would you say needs to happen to get more people of my age and generation into the hobby and keep it alive? I basically stumbled into it due to having space and time to use and time to kill while I was job hunting last summer. No offense to you all, I'm not calling you old, but I'm the youngest guy in my local homebrew club as well.
We are old, man, and that is the problem. Jason, here's what this is my response. This is on you, pal. We need the younger homebrewers out there doing this, making noise, showing people how badass this hobby is. I almost feel like there's a level of disingenuousness that comes from us old folks. And don't get me wrong, I used to be you, my man. 20 years ago, I was in your shoes. I was in my mid-20s. I was actually 21 when I brewed my first batch. And I was just like you. I mean, I was doing everything, learning this brand new thing and developing my skills and getting obsessed with it. I liked it enough that it kept me in it, but I also went out and I told my friends, and my roommate started brewing with me. I told my brother, my twin brother, so same age, he started brewing. That was the way we got, we built steam in this hobby. And I can't say that I was heavily influenced by the people who were ahead of me by another, generation. I learned from them, and that's what we're here for. That's what I feel like, infotainment, as they say. I hope that we can provide information that helps younger brewers like you. But I got to say, man, I'm not sure what the answer is. And I feel like a part of that is because I'm not going to pretend that I understand your generation more than I do. I don't. And I love you guys, and I want to see you brewing, and we want to be able to offer the kind of, information that helps you stay in it, whether that means geeking out and building a big 3-tier system or simplifying it so that you can brew in an apartment. But the younger generation has to take some responsibility for introducing what they love to their friends in their generation. And other than that, I think what we have been doing is hopefully it's helping a little bit, but I'm not sure what the answer is.
Yeah, this is a really important challenge for the industry that we need to tackle. I started brewing 15 years ago. I'm turning 40 this year, so I was 25. And homebrewing was pretty popular amongst people in their mid-20s, at least in Portland, Oregon, 15 years ago. And now, our club, we have maybe one person that's like 30-ish years old. And a lot of us have aged with the club. So a lot of us were 25, 15 years ago, about when the club was formed. And then now we're all 40. And, there's a handful of guys that are, closer to 50 or 60 than 40. And then we've got a couple guys, and I say guys, a lot of dudes, that are closer to 30. But I don't think we have anyone under 30 in our homebrew club of 25-ish active members. And I would love to see more young people and more women and more non-white people, more queer people get involved in the hobby. It's really unfortunate that it seems that it used to be kind of there were definitely old dudes homebrewing 20 years ago, but college people did it too. And I think this speaks to a larger cultural shift that, younger people are not dating as much. They're not doing as much in-person stuff. Also, like analog, old-timey activities like bread making and stuff like that doesn't seem to, like crafts, that kind of stuff doesn't seem to appeal to the younger generation as much as it used to. I can't help but blame technology. Video killed the homebrew star. So maybe we need better engagement with the digital channels that younger people like TikTok, etc. I don't have TikTok on my phone, so I don't know how successful of a strategy that is, but it seems that you need young people like Jason to be the next brew influencer.
Yes.
And using the channels in the language that resonates with their fellow, Gen Zers, and find the mediums to spread the joy and love of homebrewing to those their age, and try to get people out of their basements off the video games and into their garages with their friends brewing craft beer. I mean, they're even, witnessing lower rates of alcohol consumption amongst Gen Z. So there's a lot of cultural shift that's happening, and homebrewing kind of seems to be antithetical to almost all of it. And so I think this is a extreme challenge, and we need a kind of change from within if we're ever going to get more young people into the hobby.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love philosophy. It's why Brülosophy is called Brülosophy. It's the kind of the intersecting of my two passions, right? Philosophy and beer. And something that I follow, everything that's happening in the world. I am perhaps obsessed with it even. And there's an interesting somebody. I was talking with somebody about this. They're not a brewer, but somebody who's from a younger generation who I work with. And I was asking him, like, have you ever gone to a club? And she's like, oh yeah, I have a group of friends that we do, we have a reading group. And I'm like, no. I'm talking like a hobby, like a club. And she was like, no. She's like, why would I do that? No, I could just go online. And I was like, yeah, I was like, that's so curious, because for us, that was just kind of like where you got, that your gasoline, was filled the engine when you'd go to these clubs and you're like, yes, there's other people there. She's like, yeah, we have that. It's online. And I'm like, yeah, it's just different. Right. And I don't want to pretend that I can tap into that, but I certainly recognize it, and I see it, and I'm not judging it. There was a current, I just read this. It was it one of the big polling sites? I don't know if it was Gallup or whatever, but they released this data that and I don't mean to get into like touchy subjects here, but every year, the number of people who report being non-religious or having nuns, they call them the nuns, continues to grow and grow and grow. And you would think, right? Oh, they're not, it's the religious people that are, Puritans, and they don't want to. No, it's those very people who are also not drinking very much right now. And I find that very fascinating, because there's other reasons besides it being a vice necessarily. It's like health perhaps, or again, I'm not a part of that generation. I still drink beer, and I'm turning 45 in 2 weeks. There's something else there that I can't tap into, that Jason and you and your friends, can get into that. And it way better. You know it from the inside. I'm looking from the outside, and you and me both. I started brewing in 2003, 23 years ago. I started Brülosophy just a couple years after you started brewing, Jordan. Like I'm an old guy in this. I'm not going to pretend I'm not. And I really want the younger generation to see the value in this stuff, but I also don't want it to feel like, you're a bad person if you don't. We got to figure out a new way to do it, right? And a new way to approach it. And I do think the proliferation of these really cool, techie brewing products, whether it be an electric brewing system or a floating hydrometer or whatever, I think that can help. I think there's a lot of people in the younger generation who view that as kind of cool. Yeah, it's a techie thing. But again, I'm the old guy. I'm looking at that stuff going, I don't need that. I'm not a Luddite, but God, a hydrometer works just fine for me, So that's what I could go on. We could do a whole episode just on this question, Jason. I don't want to spend too long on it. But that is all the time we've got for our 420th episode. Man, 420 episodes. That's nuts. Thanks again to our amazing patrons for supporting us and submitting questions. These episodes are always a blast. Jordan, do you have any final words for our listeners out there?
Thanks again for sticking around, and see you 420 more episodes to go.
All right. If there's anything you'd like for us to address in a future Brü A episode, consider becoming a patron, and we will almost certainly get to it. Plus, you get some pretty nifty stuff for your support as well. Otherwise, you can email your questions to feedback@brülosophy.com. Don't forget to check out The Brülosophy Show, where host Martin Keene is creating some truly awesome content out there. You can find it at youtube.com/@The Show, or just search YouTube for Brülosophy. And make sure to head to brülosophy.com to keep up with all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.